Hello everybody, and welcome back to Random Vids. I know I never upload on Fridays, but I actually have time today, so I figured a video we haven't done in a while is a SpongeBob review. So I'm slowly but surely trying to review each episode of SpongeBob ever created. And about 3-ish months ago, I reviewed every Season 1 episode, and then about 2 months ago, I reviewed every Season 2 episode. So, I think it's time to review every Season 3 episode. I eventually want to get all the way to the end, but it might take a bit, because these videos do take longer to make. But anywho, let's get started with reviewing every single episode from SpongeBob Season 3. Man, oh man, talk about a great way to start off Season 3. So, for this episode, Plankton and Mr. Krabs basically switch sides. Because Plankton always has wanted to know what it's like to run the Krusty Krab. And this is exactly what happens. I've reviewed this episode before. It's a great one. It's easily one of my favorites from Season 3. And it's a great start to Season 3 as well. So I'd give this one an S. Interesting. 2 episodes in, we already have a Larry episode. So, SpongeBob accidentally gets sunblock on his nose. And Larry thinks that means he's a lifeguard, because all these lifeguards have this white stuff on their nose. So, SpongeBob is now a lifeguard with Larry. Larry runs off and lets SpongeBob become the lifeguard, and we all know how that goes. It goes miserably wrong, and we all know SpongeBob can't swim. So, he has to try to save Patrick, who accidentally ran into the water, and that goes horribly wrong, and then Larry just kind of walks on out and rescues them both, which I thought that was kind of funny. There is some really funny things. Like, I love any scene with Patrick in it in this one. I like when SpongeBob drinks all the water and you can hear Patrick inside his stomach. It's a great episode. I don't know if it's one of my favorites, but I think I'd give it probably a B. So this is our first mediocre episode of the season. And I guess there is some decent things about this episode. The concept of Squidward, SpongeBob, and Patrick surviving in the woods together sounds like such a great idea. Well, in episode-wise, it goes horribly wrong. Because it's basically, boiling it down, a Squidward torture episode. If you don't know what that is, basically it's an episode where someone, usually SpongeBob and Patrick, end up doing all these hurtful things to Squidward, whether if they use, whether if it's by words or if they just physically beat him up. And it happens a lot. And I don't know why Squidward is just this punching bag to the SpongeBob creators. What did he ever do? It's not like he ever deserved it. So a lot of episodes that have him as the punching bag just make it extremely annoying to watch. And I've recently got Season 13, so I've been watching Season 13. And that season also has Squidward torture. I mean, I'm not really surprised. It's basically a running gag at this point that at least every season they have to have Squidward torture. But for 13 freaking seasons, we had to have this stupid running gag that nobody likes. This episode's garbage. F. I always have really mixed feelings on this episode. On one half, I think it's a pretty good episode. On the other half, I've seen episodes like this before in the past. Someone wants to keep an animal, and then someone else says, no, you can't keep them, and then they have the sad emotional scene of them saying bye to the animal. I don't know. I think the episode is fine, but it's not one of my favorites. Any scene with Patrick in it, though, is hilarious, but I don't know. Some parts are just kind of meh. I'd give it a C. So funny enough, until this episode, I really don't remember Squidward ever trying a Krabby Patty. But man, what a great concept to an episode. It's just simple. Squidward trying a Krabby Patty. But obviously, he's too stubborn to try one, and he doesn't want SpongeBob to give him one either. So, when he finally ends up tasting one for the first time, he loves it. And he wants another one, but like I said, he doesn't want SpongeBob to know. So he ends up sneaking in, and SpongeBob apparently goes in at 3 a.m. or 4, I forget what it was, to, I forget what he had to do. Count the buns, count the sesame seeds, or something silly. Something that's like, oh yeah, that's a SpongeBob thing. And Squidward runs in and just eats all the patties. It's a really good, this is how you do Squidward episodes. It's just such a classic from this season. The jokes are really good. There's a lot of funny moments in this episode. It's an easy S tier. Interesting. This one's a classic among many, and I do think it's a decent episode, But I just feel like the story kind of meanders along. It's just the same thing. SpongeBob is afraid of Fletch the Flounder, because he's gonna kick SpongeBob's butt. So that's basically the whole story. SpongeBob's just scared and he runs away. Although what this episode really does good in is the jokes. The jokes are really good. And of course the ending where SpongeBob actually can't get her. It's a pretty cool way to end it, I guess. But it's just an alright episode. I'd give it probably like a C+. Ooh, this one's a pretty interesting one. So SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs create the infinite nasty patty for what they think is a fake critic. But it really isn't fake, and they end up thinking that they killed the critic. But it wasn't even the patty, it was the fly who flew into the critic's mouth. So, oh man, this story is pretty good. Although, the scenes where they're just trying to hide the dead body from, or what they think is a dead body, from the officers gets very, I've seen that story millions of times type thing. But it's still overall a pretty good episode. I'd give it a B. I bet you if you ask someone what's the first thing that pops into your mind when you think about SpongeBob Season 3, I'm sure some of them might say this episode in particular. Which, yes, this is a very great classic episode, and I love it how this is one of those episodes where we can actually enjoy watching a Squidward Patrick SpongeBob episode and not just be entirely annoyed by them like Club SpongeBob, where it's just a lot of Squidward torture. This actually has, this is actually a really great episode. In fact, I think I saw in somewhere on YouTube that apparently one of the newer episodes, I think it's season 14, takes hints from Idiot Box. I think they called it like Squidiot Box or something. I don't know, it's kind of silly. I've never seen season 14. I haven't even finished watching season 13 yet, so I don't know. But hey, this episode is really good. Has some great jokes in it. I'd give it an A. So like season 1, this season has 2 Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy episodes. That's nice. And this one's definitely the weaker out of the two. I don't mind this one. There is some great things in it, but there's a few scenes in this one that's just really odd. I do like how it starts with Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy just casually going to the Krusty Krab, and Mermaid Man casually, randomly just taking his belt off. But unfortunately, I guess for starters, I guess they're scared of SpongeBob, so they leave. Or they just don't want SpongeBob to annoy them. And so SpongeBob gets his hands on Mermaid Man's belt and ends up shrinking everyone. And of course, any scene with Patrick in it in this episode is hilarious, with the Wumbo thing. But what I don't like is that everyone... I shouldn't say everyone got mad at... Well, I guess they did get mad at SpongeBob, but... I don't know, the ending is a little odd, where SpongeBob just shrinks the whole town and himself. That's a very odd ending. Although it is kind of funny having Plankton come back and seeing what the town looks like. But it's just a weird fix to the problem type of situation. But whatever. At least it ain't canon, so nothing else to have to say. It's just an alright one. I'd give it probably a C+. Not gonna lie, a lot of the older episodes with Mrs. Puff in it were very below average. It was just the same old shtick of SpongeBob failing his driver's license, and then Mrs. Puff having to pay for it at the end. Nothing different, it's just that they would find another situation to get them in. The only one that I liked from the older days was Hall Monitor, but like Doing Time, this one's just dumb. And I hated how much, if it wasn't Squidward getting tortured, it was Mrs. Puff. Basically, anyone who hates SpongeBob is the ones who get the most tortured. So I guess that's their punishment for not liking SpongeBob? Okay. It's just your typical, they crash, and Mrs. Puff goes to jail. This time it's more of a focus around jail thing, and SpongeBob and Patrick try to break her out. It's just a dumb episode, because then Mrs. Puff gets tortured even more in this episode, thanks to our security guards. But apparently it was all a hallucination. It's a dumb episode. I'd give it like... I think F might be a little too mean to it, so I'll give it a D. Okay, interesting. This one's a pretty good one. Another classic SpongeBob Patrick Squidward episode. Although, yeah, it does have a few Squidward torture in it, but nothing too annoyingly bad like other episodes. AKA Club SpongeBob. But it does kind of meander along a little bit with it just being a snowball fight, and then basically making Squidward come out to play. But it's not that bad of an episode when you compare it to other Squidward episodes, so I'll give it a pass. I think it's pretty good, and I like the snow theme too. I'll give it a B. Man, for once, I actually think this one is one of the more underappreciated episodes of Season 3. Or maybe just one that's less overrated than others. But it's simple. Mr. Krabs has a yard sale, and SpongeBob gets a hat, but apparently it costs a lot of money, so Mr. Krabs tries to get it back. I think we've seen episodes like this before, but this is probably one of the best ways they can do it. And because it's in Season 3, there's a lot of funny jokes, like the floating shopping list scene. And there's just so many, of course, because it's in Season 3, there's a lot of great jokes. Once again, like I said, episode that I feel like is very underappreciated compared to other episodes this season. I think it's a really great one. I'd give it like an A+. Man, and this is like the complete opposite of One Crab Trash. I think this episode is too overrated. Because honestly, this episode doesn't do anything except for SpongeBob thinking that he's famous. Because apparently he was like somewhat seen in a Krusty Krab commercial. And he thinks he's famous now, so he acts all cocky around everybody. And they don't like that, they just want their food. So SpongeBob eventually goes back to being a fry cook. It's a very pointless, dumb episode. And the whole striped sweater number is just kind of meh. I feel like it's way too overrated. It's nothing. It's just a quick little jingle. This episode is a little bit of a weaker one in Season 3, in my opinion. It doesn't really do anything. This is what I think of when I think of people overhyping Season 3. I'm like, as seen on TV is what comes to mind sometimes. And I'm like, it's not that good of an episode, honestly. I'd give it like a D. Okay, this one's an interesting one. So I really do like the first half of this episode, where Squidward finally quits the Krusty Krab because Mr. Krabs is being obnoxious. So he does the right thing and quits, but then it leads to him being homeless, I guess. So SpongeBob, being the nice fellow he is, lets Squidward into his house. And that's about where the best parts of this episode ends. And then the second half of the episode is a lot of Squidward getting very cocky and making SpongeBob do everything, although we do get the funny and why are you in uniform line in this episode. And then it leads to SpongeBob going crazy insane and basically begs Mr. Krabs to give Squidward his job back. And then it kind of ends how it begins. It's just another one of these dumb episodes that doesn't really need to exist. I did like the first half, and I feel like it had something going for it, but the second half just felt very meh. Now, yeah, you could say, well, it's either that or Squidward gets tortured. Yeah, but in this case, it just doesn't feel right to torture SpongeBob because, unlike other seasons, this season didn't have too many Squidward torture in it. So, and it just felt very out of character for Squidward, too, to randomly be so demanding of everything. So, it's just a very odd episode overall. I'd give it, like, I'd give it probably like if I wanted to be nice, I'd give it like a C-. If I was being mean, I'd give it like a D+, so somewhere around in there. Alright, this is better. Finally, a good episode again. So, this is another great classic in Season 3. Basically, SpongeBob wants to get into the Salty Splatoon, but he's not tough enough. So, throughout the whole episode, he basically tries to get in. That concept could get very annoying. Almost kind of... There's an episode, I think, in Season 6 where Mr. Krabs is trying to break into his own house to do something with Pearl's party. I forget what it is. That is how you make that type of story boring. But luckily for this episode, they made it really interesting. And I love every attempt. I love all the attempts that SpongeBob does to try to get in. Between acting like a tattoo and pretending to beat up Patrick. It's hilarious. It's a good classic. I'd give it an A. Well, did you look at that? Everyone's favorite episode, aka Band Geeks, has one of the characters returning from that. And would you look at that? It's a sequel to Squilliam. I really like Squilliam. He's definitely one of my favorite characters. And it's so unfortunate he's not in the newer seasons. Like, his last appearance was like in Season 7 somewhere, I think. Which is a shame, because I love his rivalry with Squidward, and it goes perfectly that it doesn't feel like dumb, or it doesn't feel like he gets the upper hand opposed to Squidward. Okay, except in Professor Squidward, but we'll get to that one eventually. But this episode is just a great sequel to the character Squilliam. Um, Squidward basically pretends he has a five-star restaurant just for Squilliam to, I don't know what the word is, to stop bullying Squidward, I guess the word is, for being a cashier. So it leads to some hilarious jokes like Squidward imagining Squilliam in his underwear, to SpongeBob erasing his mind, to whatever. This episode is crazy chaotic, and I love it. It's an A for me. Huh, interesting. This is the second time that now they thought Mr. Krabs was a robot. Except this one is way better than the one in Season 2. So, SpongeBob watches a scary movie, so he gets scared and thinks that Mr. Krabs is a robot now. I know I am trying to rush through the storytelling a little bit, because I could sit here and tell you guys about each story of each episode, but I gotta keep it moving. So I'm gonna talk about little quick things of the episode. So SpongeBob thinks Krabs is a robot, and he obviously is not, and he even gets Squidward to believe that too, which is hilarious. This episode has a lot of funny moments in it, like Mr. Krabs singing to this random song and then wants the guy to play it again, which leads to a bunch of funny memes. And it's just such a great... It's just such a funny episode, and it's really great. It's like if you take Imitation Krabs and make it even better, this is what you get. This is I don't know if I want to give it an S, but I think I'll give it like an A+. Oh man, I'm a sucker when it comes to seeing cute characters in Bikini Bottom. I don't think Junior the Clam is really that cute, but hey, it's a sweet episode. So SpongeBob and Patrick find a clam, and we basically get to see them try to raise this clam. It's basically the best way they could do this story, because they've tried this story in other episodes and it just didn't work, or they had like weird creepy animals, but we'll get to those episodes later. So I really think the first half of this episode is probably the better half, because we get to see kind of the funnier side, where the second half is just more SpongeBob and Patrick fighting because they can't really get along. This is one of those episodes where Patrick gets a little annoying, and by little I mean he gets pretty annoying in this episode. So the second half is basically just a lot of them fighting, opposed to, who's supposed to be our main focus, Junior. So that does get a little old, and it does definitely weaken the score for me, but I think this first half of this episode is really good, and the very end is good too. I'd give it a B, I'd say. Well, here's our comedy relief episode, and it's done really well too. Like, there was so many funny moments in this episode, and it's simple. SpongeBob and Patrick are just painting a wall, but they make it so hilarious. It's just so funny to watch. And there's a lot of funny moments in this episode, like Patrick saying, "Hurry up, we're running out of time cards," and him just making the situation worse, but it ends up working. The "we have technology" scene, oh my, there's so many funny moments in this episode. So many memeable parts of this episode are great. And I love how Mr. Krabs, at the end, it ends up Mr. Krabs tricking them that the paint actually can wash off, and he ends up paying for it, and all that paint they just painted on ends up getting ruined, because it gets, I guess the paint ends up getting, not destroyed, what's the word? It gets wiped up with saliva, which is funny. This is a really great episode. It's an easy A+. Oh man, this episode is really great. Any show that has this type of episode in it is always really good. Like a behind the scenes episode, or the history of type of episode, which I think is always really interesting to watch, and it usually turns out really funny too. Like for this episode, it's basically the history of the Krusty Krab and learning more about it. And of course with some hilarious stuff in it, like any scene with Squidward or Patrick in it is hilarious. And SpongeBob constantly wanting to cook a Krabby Patty to the Hoopla guy. There's so many great things in this episode. In my opinion, it's my favorite episode from Season 3, so of course it's an S tier. And from the best to the worst. Hey, this is a very interesting episode. So, SpongeBob throws a party, is super strict, gets locked out of the house, so we get to see him try to break in, goes to jail, and there's the episode. That's basically how it is. It's a dumb episode. I don't really remember much of it because it's been forever since I've seen it. But it's dumb. It's such a dumb episode. Like, I feel like when everyone says Season 3, like, oh my gosh, Season 3 is perfect. They just gotta take out Party Pooper Pants. and then it would be like even better yet. I feel like this is the episode everyone agrees is the worst from the season, and for some, even the only bad episode. I disagree with that, but I do think this is probably the worst episode of the season. It's pretty bad. Give me an F. Here's another classic. So, Chocolate with Nuts has SpongeBob and Patrick selling chocolate to people. It's that simple, I know. There's a lot of really funny moments in this episode, like when the random guy is there and Patrick says, "I love you." Then the guy just slams the door. Or Patrick trying to focus on the guy where he's like, focusing. That scene is so hilarious. And this, of course, the obvious one, the chocolate guy. Oh my, there's a lot of really funny moments in this episode, although there is some minuses to this episode. I don't really like how gullible Patrick and SpongeBob are in this episode, where they believe everything that everyone says. So we have to have 3 scenes of this con man conning SpongeBob and Patrick. 3 times. He gives them small bags, he gives them big bags, and then he basically gives SpongeBob and Patrick a lot of their money. It's kind of dumb. I don't really like that scene because I feel like their goal of trying to get money just gets wasted at those times, and it gets old by the second. It gets old by the first time they do it. So that definitely was the weakest part of this episode. But other than that, I do think this episode was good. But ooh, I don't know if I would want to give it an A yet. Maybe a B plus. If I wanted to be really, really nice, I'd give it an A minus. But I think I'd give it a B plus. Okay, this is the way better Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy episode of the season. So, Barnacle Boy changes and goes to the dark side. Already we have funny jokes. I love how it starts like the 4th one does, where they're just casually going to the Krusty Krab. Barnacle Boy ends up becoming evil because he thinks everyone treats him like a boy opposed to a man. So he ends up changing to the dark side, as I like to call it, where him, the Dirty Bubble, and Man Ray play silly pranks on everyone, which is kind of silly, I guess. And then Mermaid Man and SpongeBob, Patrick, Squidward, and Sandy try to stop Barnacle Boy and them. This episode has a lot of funny stuff in it. Between Mermaid Man just casually eating an ice cream cone and it explodes, to basically any scene in this whole episode is really hilarious. I'd give this one an easy, I don't know if I want to give it an S tier yet, but I'd give it like an A plus for sure. What if Patrick did go to Bone School with SpongeBob? Well, then it would turn into Driven to Tears from season 4. No, I mean the proper way. Okay, then we got a better episode. Although I don't really even think this is like a really amazing episode or anything, because there is some meh moments in it. I think the best parts of this episode are a few moments at the very beginning and a few moments at the very end, but the middle of the episode gets really annoying. It's basically Patrick doing stupid things to SpongeBob and SpongeBob getting in trouble for it. I'm pretty sure we've seen this running gag in other shows as well. One person gets the other person in trouble, and of course they're the ones who end up getting in trouble and not the person causing it. Those are very annoying episodes, honestly. But luckily, the saving grace is that this is in season 3, so we get to have some good jokes, and they actually do a good resolution to it at the end, and they both learn to work together, opposed to not. I'd give this one probably like a C, maybe even a C minus. Oh yeah, classic SpongeBob, SpongeBob, Squidward, Mr. Krabs episode. These episodes can usually be pretty good, especially in the earlier seasons like this. It's simple. They go fishing. Except SpongeBob accidentally throws Mr. Krabs $100th into the ocean. So they have to try to get it back. And Mr. Krabs goes insane. But he ends up getting it back at the end. But ends up having to pay for it. It's a simple yet sweet episode. I'd probably give it a B+. Oh man, this episode is funny. So, what if SpongeBob and Bikini Bottom was like prehistoric times? Well, this is what you get, and it leads to a bunch of hilarious moments. It's another classic SpongeBob Patrick Squidward episode where it's funny seeing them interact with each other and with a lot of funny, hilarious moments. No Squidward torture. And the story itself, I mean, it's plain and simple. They're trying to figure out what fire is, but because it's our funny SpongeBob cast, it makes it really funny. And seeing SpongeBob, Squidward, and Patrick fight over this one log of wood is hilarious. There's a lot of really funny moments in this episode. I feel like this episode is criminally underrated. It's a great episode. It's easily one of my favorites from this season. I'd give it an S tier. I feel like this one is another one of those episodes from Season 3 where a lot of people are like, it's not their favorite. And I can definitely see why. It's a lot of SpongeBob pressuring Gary to train for this silly race. Just because SpongeBob wants to beat Squidward's pet. I forget what he named her. But Gary and Squidward's pet snail love each other. So, okay. It's basically just like Gary takes a bath, but rules reverse. And way more tolerable. Nah, I'm just kidding. It's not really like that episode at all, but it's like... After seeing episodes like Gary takes a bath, and just seeing how Gary just couldn't care less about SpongeBob sometimes really gets annoying and makes him one of the weakest characters in SpongeBob in those type of episodes. But if they do it well, then he can end up being a great character. I don't really know how much I feel about it. I mean, I guess it did start with Gary not listening to SpongeBob at all, but then it goes to SpongeBob pressuring Gary way too much to the point of exhaustion, and ends up breaking down on the snail track. I don't really know how I feel about this one. I'd give it like a D. It's definitely one of the weaker episodes of Season 3. Guess that sort of rhymed, huh? Oh man, this episode is a little underrated too. This episode is pretty funny. It's basically just Mr. Krabs hitting a midlife crisis, or crustacean, whatever you want to call it. And he thinks he's really old. So there's a lot of funny moments. I love the beginning scene with the funny "You're Old" song, and then a bunch of old man jokes after that. And then him just trying to be hip and young like SpongeBob and Patrick for basically the rest of the episode. It's a simple story and it works perfectly. I think it's a great episode, and it's easily one of my favorites okay, not one of my favorites, but it's a really good one. I'd give it would an A be too nice? I don't know. I'd give it it's another one of those A minuses, B plus type of, I'll give it an A minus, I think. So it's what's kind of funny about the series is we have to have that episode where somebody has to be the complete opposite of themselves. Mr. Krabs was the first one to get that treatment, where instead of being greedy and mean, now he's really nice and cheap. I guess, not cheap, but he'll actually spend his money is what I'm trying to say. I don't really think this is one of my favorite episodes of Season 3. It starts with him eating a rotten Krabby Patty, which is disgusting, and then the Flying Dutchman appears to give him one last chance to prove that he's not cheap. And it goes fine until it doesn't. And then he ends up selling SpongeBob for 62 cents. It's a weird episode. It's definitely one of the weaker ones of Season 3, I think. And it's definitely one of the weakest out of the characters becoming completely 180 of their normal personality. I'd give it I'd give it a D. I don't really enjoy this one, honestly. Not until 4. First thing that comes to mind when I think of this episode, for sure. So there is some cool things about this episode, although, once again, I don't really think it's one of my absolute favorites. Basically, SpongeBob has an accident, and he's too afraid to go outside. So Sandy and Patrick have to try to convince SpongeBob to get out of his house. The concept is really good. I just think for an episode, it's just kind of boring. And then, for some reason, a gorilla comes and takes Sandy and Patrick, and SpongeBob has to go and rescue them. But he ends up breaking the fourth wall instead, and that scares the gorilla off. Okay, I guess that is really a really funny way to defeat this gorilla. just breaking the fourth wall. Why the heck not? Then it leads to one of the most silliest end scenes to any SpongeBob episode. Overall, it's a fine episode. It's just not one of my favorites. I'd give this one a C. Another Mr. Krabs episode, and now it's even worse than Born Again Krabs. What's it with the Mr. Krabs episodes getting worse as this season goes on? We start off with like the best of the best, like Crab War again. One Krab's trash, and then we slowly stoop to Krabby Land. This episode's kind of dumb. Mr. Krabs creates a unsafe playground for kids and makes them even sign waivers just to go on this playground. And then he does it basically. It's just a cash grab. And that's basically how the whole episode is. It's just a big cash grab. I hate the episodes where Mr. Krabs shows his really cheap side, because it makes the episodes feel like they could have gone so much better if only Mr. Krabs wasn't so cheap. And that just gets... that running gag gets really annoying to me, especially in episodes like this. And Mr. Krabs treating kids like that is kind of annoying. And SpongeBob constantly hurting himself just because why not? Just so the kids can enjoy it is very odd. What type of kids are these who enjoy seeing SpongeBob be in pain? Like, it's a very odd episode. I do like the lima beans joke, though. I thought that was really funny. But I'd give this episode, like, probably an F, honestly. It's just such a boring episode. And it's definitely one of the weakest episodes of Season 3, for sure. Compare this to, like, most other episodes, and there's a big difference. Okay, this is another one of those episodes that I find really overrated. Like, I don't think it's bad by any means, but the absolute best episode of Season 3? Absolutely not. It is a fun Squidward, Patrick, SpongeBob story, but I feel like the episode goes from that to Squidward torture, because this sea bear comes and Squidward attracts it, and, well, at least this was back when Squidward at least somewhat deserved Squidward torture, but I'd be happy with none. I'm sure that's what everyone else would say, too, but at least he's actually doing it. It's more of a, like, qualifying cause that he deserves it, opposed to just doing absolutely nothing and gets, because he ends up attracting the sea bears. But that whole scene just got very long, with Squidward just getting tortured. And then it even ends with him getting hurt by a sea rhino or something like that. I don't know. And the campfire song is very overplayed. It's nothing that special, honestly. It's okay, but the best Season 3 song of all time? Absolutely not. In fact, Season 3 has some of the weakest songs, I think, out of any season. None of them really stood out, and the ones that I could hear, I mean, some of them were good, but ones like this they were either meh or they were just extremely overrated. I don't think the episode's bad by any means. I think it's a good episode, but the best in Season 3? Absolutely not. I'd give this episode probably about a C+. One thing that I like a lot about classic SpongeBob is they could take something simple as SpongeBob not finding his name tag and make it into a really great episode. So that's exactly what happened. SpongeBob can't find his name tag, so he retraces his steps. I really love the scenes with him and Patrick, or Patrick is trying to remember what to say to SpongeBob, but it ends up going horribly wrong, it just makes it really funny. It ends up turning out that he just had his shirt on backwards. Something simple like that, but I think the episode worked really well, and it was overall a really great episode, I think. Okay, not one of my favorites, but I'd give it a B tier. Oh man, talk about a funny Plankton episode. So what would happen if all of Plankton's cousins would all get together and try to steal the formula this time? Well, leads to some hilarious moments. I love, obviously, the scene where Karen finds out that her husband's first name is Sheldon, which I think is leads to a very hilarious moment. To the fact that Plankton actually ends up taking the formula and then just realizes that, ends up getting scared because he actually thinks that it's made with plankton in it, which is a funny twist. This is overall a really good episode. Definitely a really good one from Season 3. I'd give it an A. Hey, another week special in SpongeBob. Once again, another kind of like Party Pooper Pants. I don't remember too much about it. I just remember that SpongeBob makes his pants fly, and then everyone just loves it. and makes him do a bunch of chores. So then when SpongeBob finally doesn't want to do chores anymore, they get mad and try to destroy his pants, but then they're upset now because SpongeBob's pants are destroyed, and they literally make a grave for his pants. I mean, yeah, they could care less about the guy. They just want his pants. What an odd episode. Then we have the, I don't even know what you want to call it, but the flying song, I guess, that SpongeBob sings at the end. This episode is just so odd. It's so forgettable. I always forget this is even a SpongeBob episode, let alone a special. Worst episode of all time? No. But one of the weaker ones, especially from season 3, yes. I'd give it like a D-. SpongeBob meets the Strangler. Oh, this is a pretty interesting episode. I always compare it to The Bully, and I find this one a lot funnier than The Bully. Yeah, SpongeBob is kind of stupid in this episode, but it doesn't really bother me that much. He's also stupid in Club SpongeBob, and no one cares about that. So SpongeBob meets the Tattletale Strangler, and he wants to strangle SpongeBob for tattletaling on him. So SpongeBob tries to hire a bodyguard who ends up being the Tattletale Strangler with a mustache. And anytime he tries to strangle SpongeBob, it doesn't end up working. Because, like, we can all see it happening, but it doesn't end up working because anytime he tries to strangle SpongeBob, they'll end up throwing a party for him, or someone will just come by, and it's just hilarious the way they did this episode. Yeah, SpongeBob's dumb, but it doesn't bother me that much. And I think this episode is a really good episode of Season 3. I'd give it like a B+, or even like an A-. And with that, we're at our very last classic episode with, of course, Pranks-A-Lot. This is a very interesting episode. SpongeBob loves pranks, so him and Patrick end up getting a thing of invisible spray paint, but of course the two end up fighting and spray paint each other, and now they're both invisible. So they walk around and pretend they're ghosts, scare everyone except for Mr. Krabs, but I guess they do end up scaring Mr. Krabs. Just honestly, that scene's kind of funny. It's always funny seeing Mr. Krabs being scared of something instead of him being the big old scary guy. But then, from a splash of water, SpongeBob and Patrick come back, and Mr. Krabs reveals to everyone who the Bikini Bottom ghosts are. Honestly, a kind of a weak episode to end Season 3 and to end the original classic era of SpongeBob. Classic era is beloved by many, and I think it's a really good era, although I do love a lot of the modern seasons too, but there's always something about these classic seasons that just hits home that a lot of the other seasons don't, unfortunately. Although, yeah, this episode's kind of dumb, but at least, like, there wasn't too many bad episodes in Season 3. And, well, unfortunately, it's just going to get worse from there, until, of course, modern SpongeBob. But we have a minute till we get to modern SpongeBob. Honestly, I can consider Season 3 the weakest out of the classic era. It's way too overrated. You know how I am about overrated stuff, right, Waluigi Pinball? So, there's no way that I'm putting Season 3 as my absolute favorite season, because I look back on it and I'm like, what did people see about this season that's, like, the greatest? Yeah, there's a lot of really good episodes, but it's just personally not my favorite. It does have a lot of weak episodes, too, that people think are really good, like Can You Spare a Dime, The Sponge Who Could Fly, Club SpongeBob. Some of those are just kind of dumb. And they're beloved just because they're classic SpongeBob. Hey, if you think those episodes are good, then I'm glad that you can find good things about those episodes that I can't find. I personally think they're bad episodes, but hey, that's fine. I think Season 3 overall is really good, but just not as good as Seasons 1 and definitely 2. So, I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm glad I actually stayed under an hour. I did try to rush a little bit with the video, because I know there's a lot of Season 3 episodes. I know there's a lot of episodes. The easiest one to do is Season 10, because there's not a lot. But anywho, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys next time. So, I hope you guys have a great weekend, and I'll see you on Monday.